Hello and welcome to Into the Woods with Holly Wharton. This podcast has evolved over the 5+ years since it first launched. From now on, I'm going to be talking about deepening your connection with yourself, taking inspired action, and really trusting yourself and your intuition. And also mindset, of course, but mindset of all kinds, not just business mindset. I think. Things are changing for me, as you may have noticed if you've been following me online or listening to this podcast, so anything goes here. I hope you stay along for the ride. Thank you so much for joining us today, and now let's get into this week's episode. Hello and welcome to the Into the Woods podcast, episode 354. This is your host, Holly Wharton, and I've got a new guest for you today. And even more exciting, I've got the first male guest on the show. As you may know, this podcast started out as being a podcast for women entrepreneurs to tell their story. So I only had women guests for the first forever. And for a while, I've been really uncomfortable with that, but I haven't really been doing guests, and so I wasn't sure what to do. And then I started thinking I really wanted to have some conversations with people in my life that are really into doing long-distance trails, as am I, and I wanted to share those stories with you. So I've got Stephen Marriott on the show today. Stephen, I met through my friend Adam's Camino de Santiago meetup group. We met, a few years ago, I think now, on one of Adam's walks. So who is Stephen? Stephen R. Marriott is a best-selling author and traveler. He grew up in Portishead of the West Country of England. Although just a small-town boy at heart, he has worked in stockbroking in the City of London and has visited over 50 countries. His writing career began in 2012 when, seeking adventure, he took a very long walk across Spain and subsequently discovered his creative spirit. So, I am very excited to share this episode with you. What are you going to learn today? We're going to talk about what is long-distance walking and why you might want to do it, what you might be able to expect from life on a long-distance trail. We talk about a couple of different trails, not just the Camino de Santiago, which is my dream trail, but also walking the Inca Trail and the Lost City Trek in Colombia, which I'd actually never heard of before. We discuss why walking a long-distance trail is both an inner and outer journey, and what can you get out of walking a trail like this? Finally, how this type of experience can be life-changing. So, Stephen went into the Camino de Santiago as a person working in finance in London, and he came out of it a writer, among other things. So here he is telling his story. Hi, Steve. How are you doing today?
I'm good, thanks. Yeah, glad to be on the show. Thanks for having me.
You are actually the very first man to be on my podcast.
Wow. Gosh, I don't know what to say about it. It sounds special in a way.
Well, I started this podcast as a show. It was originally for women entrepreneurs, so I was only interviewing women. And then time went on, and somehow I never had men on the show. And I just started thinking, I think it's about time. I included the other half of the population.
We do exist, as you know. I know you're married. So,
yes.
Yes, glad to be. I try to sort of up the sort of macho image if we need to sort of balance things out a bit.
I think you're good as you are.
Okay.
So we are here to talk about long-distance walking, which is something that's very dear to my heart. And I know you've got even more experience in this than I have. So before we get into it, what is long-distance walking? Like, how would you define it?
That's a good question, because I think long-distance walking does mean different things to different people. I think there's people who walk it for the physical challenge, a sort of a test of their physical ability, who walk very long distances on some very well-known trails across various continents. I'm not like that. I enjoy the physical aspect, but it's not why I do it, I guess. I do it more for the pleasure and the escapism, I think, into nature. But how would I define it? I just say it's an extended walk in the park for me.
Yeah, I agree. To me, I'm really flexible on what I consider to be a long distance walk. To me, it's anything more than, like, a day walk is obviously one day, but anything longer than that, when you're walking for 2, 3, 4, etc. days in a row, to me, that's long distance walking, because it's quite unusual to kind of keep going on the same trail for multiple days in a row, unless it's kind of something that you've planned. So I don't know. I guess that's what I would consider it to be.
Yeah, I mean, I think I forget them now, but there are people who do this seriously. They have different terms for it, which I can't remember off my head now. So I think for some people it is something specific. But yeah, I guess it's longer than walking for a day, yeah. Because I think then as you walk for longer than sort of a day and outside of your normal routine, I think that's when the magic can sometimes happen.
Absolutely. And it takes you outside of your comfort zone, and it takes you kind of into a new mindset, a new realm. And I think the more days you spend on a trail, the more you kind of disconnect from your normal daily life and your normal rhythms, and you kind of get into this other world of the trail.
Absolutely, yes. Yeah. That's what I've discovered and continue to discover, I'd say.
It's so magical. So what was your first long distance trail, and why were you inspired to walk it? You have a great story for this.
Yes, I know you're thinking of my first Camino trail, but I have done a couple of longer walks. Well, not longer than the Camino, but if we're going to define it as more than one day, but I won't go into detail about those. But I guess they're probably what sort of set the seed in motion to enjoy the outdoor experience of long-term walking. And I've had over a year out in travel around Latin America over 10 years ago. And like a lot of people, when they visit Peru, I did the Inca Trail. So that walking to Machu Picchu, I think it was about 3.5 days, something like that. And that really got me into the idea of the outdoors and enjoying hiking. But I think at that stage in my life, it was a very memorable, adventurous experience. And the build up to arriving at the lost Inca city of Machu Picchu was amazing because you saw Inca ruins and relics on the way. But I would say that's not where my mind changed. I think I started to observe more things then. It was very hard not to observe the wonders of the Peruvian sort of jungle and Inca ruins. But that was probably the first longest walk I did. And then subsequently, later in that trip in Colombia, I trekked on a trail which they called the Trail of Ciudad Perdido, so the Lost City Trek. And that was, again, to pre-Columbian ruins on the coastline, a jungle on the coastline in Colombia. And again, that was not many people walked that then because
I've never heard of it.
Yeah, that was an adventure because you arrived at these pre-Columbian ruins and you had them to yourself, and it was a bit of a trek to get there, and not many, because Colombia and its past problems didn't have so much tourism. Because of that, it was a trail that not so many people walked, just a sort of rare bunch of sort of crazy backpackers that then decided to visit Colombia. So that was more of an adventurous thing and sort of heightened my curiosity for the world and sort of hidden treasures. You might call it more the sort of Indiana Jones style walking. But I think what I'm sort of getting at, I think when I took a long time out of my life to travel around Latin America, that's where the seeds for sort of getting out of one's comfort zone, for seeing the world perhaps through different eyes, and starting to realize that there was more out there than just a sort of, how would I put it, plodding through one's daily routine, and to see more, or to say visit things not through a sort of tick box tourist style exercise. I think you do need to sort of change your environment for longer than you would normally do, and I think that's when you just become, your awareness heightens. It's not that you see anything more physically, but you just become more aware of the sort of the subtle things in life, or you start to take more of an interest in things which were there in front of you, but you didn't pay much attention to. So so to cut a long story short, with those were probably the longest trails I first did. But then I know you're alluding to what you would call a really long hike, which was my 31-day hike on the Camino de Santiago, or the Camino Frances, which is the traditional trail of the Camino de Santiago.
So let me go back to where you were talking about the Inca Trail. How challenging was that? Was that something you just spontaneously decided to do, or did you train for that? What was that like?
Good question. Well, me and my ex-wife knew we were going to travel around South America. And so that was just, I think, one of two things which we knew in advance of that trip that we would definitely do. And apart from that, we wanted to be, we had a lot of time over a year, so we wanted to sort of the trip to sort of be kind of spontaneous in a sense. But that one, the Inca Trail, I think when we did it, it was in 2007, and even then it was becoming more regulated. So to protect the walk, they only the authorities only allow a certain amount of people walking the trail a day.
Oh, good.
And arriving in Machu Picchu. And I'm not sure the numbers now, but I think on any one day, only 60 people can set off on it. So there can be more than 60 people on the trail at any one time. But every day, only 60 new people are allowed to set off on it. So that's more regulated. And because of that, you have to plan in advance and, apply to do it with a guide, etc. But to tell the truth, well, I was a little bit younger then, so probably fresher legs. Did we do much planning for it? Not really. Is it quite a hard trek? Yes, at times, because it's at high altitude.
Yeah.
And I think you climb up to about, I think 3,600 meters, 4,000 meters. Yeah, approaching that on one of the highest peaks. And that's hard if you're not acclimatized and if you're not fit. But I would say the average fit person can do it, but they need to arrive in Peru for at least a week before and get acclimatized. And because we'd already been traveling, we'd already done some other sort of long day hikes or 2-day hikes and things in the Andes, we were sort of mountain fit by the time we came to do that sort of 3 months into our trip or so.
Okay.
But the sort of the starting off point or the starting city is Cusco, and then you have to travel to the start of the walk. But in Cusco, we would see people arrive straight off the plane, going up and down the hills of Cusco, with problems already and sort of bending over and trying to catch their breath.
Oof.
And, some of those, because their time was limited, a day or two later, they would be hitting the Machu Picchu trail, which I would not advise. So I would say that the thing is, if you're unfit, before you go on something like that, do some walks, try to get up to average fitness. But acclimatize. You need to acclimatize when you do anything like that.
And when you do that trail, are you camping or where are you staying?
Yeah. So I think it was 3 nights. So it's 3 nights of camping. But it's, or how to put it, it's kind of glamping in a sense these days, because you have to have a guide, and also they provide porters.
Oh, nice.
So it's a kind of an economy really for for sort of the locals in Andean locals, indigenous locals in that area. And so they will carry the tents for you, carry, gas canisters for the cooking and the pots and things. So they really do, lug it around for it. And you have a day pack with your sort of change of clothes in, or just oversized day pack. So it's you are sort of a bit spoiled on that one. And kind of I actually felt a bit guilty on one of the days, and so I asked to swap for a morning my backpack with one of the porters.
Oh wow!
And so admittedly, I'd acclimatized to better than other people who hadn't been in Peru for as long as I had. But my gosh, it was a heavy pack, and it was funny, I think, because he knew that he didn't have to arrive at the base camp into a couple of hours, and now his load was probably a fifth or something what it normally was. He just took a break when we swapped packs. He just held back and I think took a break for an hour or two.
Wow.
Just relaxing. And then within sort of a couple of hours later or so, it wasn't long before he just passed me with my pack and got to the day camp at to the end of the day. And that was tough. So I think I would say to anyone, if you're doing the Machu Picchu trail, the Inca Trail, make sure you tip generously to the porters, because I don't think they're particularly well paid.
Yeah.
And you know what? Many of them don't actually get to see Machu Picchu either. Oh. They just carry everybody's load there, and then they sort of then have to leave at the end of the trail to go and help to go back to the start and help more people.
Oh wow!
So it's spoiled but a wonderful experience.
And once you get to the top, then do you hike the same trail back down, or do you go down the other side, or where do you go from there?
So you arrive at the Inca ruins, Machu Picchu, and one of the other bonuses actually I should have said is that because you hike there, you arrive before all the tourists. You arrive at sunrise, because tourists can arrive at the town below called, what is it called, Aguas Calientes, and there's a train which takes tourists to that town, and then they can arrive when it opens officially at sort of 9 or 10 a.m. So for a few hours at sunrise, you get the whole place to yourself.
Wow.
But after that, you then go down to the town below, and you can get a train back to Cuzco.
Oh, nice.
No.
So obviously this is a mountain trail. How scary is it? Like, do you have like cliff drops down the side of the trail? What is it like?
Gosh, yeah, this is. I'm gonna have to trace back into my memory here a bit, and just sort of as I said, it was 2007, I believe. So it's a little bit fuzzy now, but I guess the key things which do stand out. Yes, there are some high peaks, and there is a lot of going up and down these peaks.
Oh, yeah.
So hard on the knees sometimes going down, and it's a mixture of rainforest, jungle,
wow,
kind of rugged terrain, and you do pass through a few sort of very remote villages, sort of almost like farmsteads. But the beautiful thing about it is that you get an education in Inca society on the way there, because there's a lot of most people only know the ruins of Cuzco, or maybe they visit some in the Sacred Valley near Cuzco, and of course Machu Picchu if they go there. But there's ruins and terraced ruins where corn and maize would have been grown, and other outposts and things which your guide will tell you about on the way there. And so I can't remember now, but maybe it was sort of 4 or 5 significant smaller ruins or settlements which you see before you get there. So you get a real sense of what Inca settlements are about and who they were about. And nobody knows for sure what happened to Machu Picchu, which apparently was only inhabited for about 100 years or so. There's different varying stories. People say that they ran out of water or disease. Talking about disease and the cities being wiped out. But nobody knows for sure. But the great thing is, as you learn about Incas and you see their various sites, you start to create your own story in your mind about what was their fate, what happened. And then obviously it's a fantastic build up to Machu Picchu itself.
And it really is like stepping into a different world, because you're obviously in a foreign country, very different landscape than what you're used to, very different culture. It's really very different.
Yeah, it is. It is like stepping back in time, and I mentioned Indiana Jones, it does feel a bit like that. I think Hiram Bingham discovered Machu Picchu in the 30s, and the Indiana Jones character has to be loosely based on Hiram Bingham. And Cuzco is still quite sort of a little bit wild around the edges. There's a lot of the indigenous Peruvians that live there and tout in the streets and have market stalls and things, and with the women in their wonderful colourful dresses and traditional wear. So it does feel like that, and you sort of get the train we got back is a sort of a rickety kind of old train. But I don't know. Have you ever seen the film The Motorcycle Diaries?
No, I haven't.
You should watch The Motorcycle Diaries if you haven't seen it. So it's a sort of coming of age story if you haven't heard of it of Che Guevara.
Yeah.
So it's his motorcycle tour with his good friend around South America before he was known as Che. And so they tour. They wanted to see their South America before they just committed to being doctors. So it's a wonderful coming of age story. But they trek to Machu Picchu when they're in Peru, and they have a young Inca boy who acts as their guide. And when they arrive on a sort of crevice, a hill looking down into lower sort of parts of Machu Picchu, you have this real. I mean, this was in the 50s. You have this real sense, of time standing still there in the film, and nothing's really changed. It may be different now, more than 10 years later. But when we did that, and we arrive at the same place that in the film that Che Guevara arrives at, and I think it's called something like the Sun Gate or something. The Sun Gate, I think, because that's the point you see the sunrise up behind Machu Picchu. You're looking down. Of course, the tourists haven't arrived then, and you have the place. You're about to inhabit this kind of lost world and or lost city, and it really does feel like you're stepping back in time. And so there are still a few places like that which are untouched by the sort of modern urbanized world that we inhabit.
I love that. It's definitely on my list of things to do someday, but it's so many other things.
I know, yes. Well, you've got to sort of. I know you've got a few trails left in the UK that you want to do.
Oh, many. I love walking here. So moving from one Spanish-speaking country to another, what inspired you to walk the Camino?
Okay, do you want the abbreviated version or the longer version?
Just go for whatever, whatever comes out.
All right. So, okay. So my earlier time out in South America, I guess you could have said, might have corrupted me in many ways, for lack of a better phrase, or at least put in my mind the adventure and excitement of getting outside of the normal sort of holiday and the adventurous side of things. And so, after coming back from South America, I went back to normal life in the financial world, which is my background work-wise. But unfortunately, I went for a few personal changes. I went through a separation, and I didn't feel particularly content back in the 9-to-5 world. My previous company made life very easy for me and gave me my old job back effectively. So I guess you could say I was looking for something. And anyway, after I think another 2 or 3 years back in that job and going for these changes, I decided I wanted to see more of South America, or some of the parts I didn't see before, or spend more time in the places I liked. And also I wanted to see Asia. So yes, I took off again and did some more traveling for about 6 months, knowing that I couldn't really go back to the world of finance and investment again. A little bit lost and not really feeling my place was London anymore, because I'd gone for a separation as well and I wasn't settled. But I came back from that trip roughly 6 months later, having had some interesting and adventurous experiences, but if I'm honest, I was probably no happier in myself than I was before and hadn't found what I really wanted. And so I was then staying temporarily at a friend's place in central London, and it was a Monday night, and I walked on my own into a pub. Just me and the barman were in the pub. It was a rainy kind of miserable London grey night. You know how they can be sometimes.
Yes.
Yeah. I think the barman sensed maybe depression in me or loneliness or something, and he, without even speaking to him, he kind of looked over at me from across the bar and said, "You need to walk the Camino de Santiago." And sort of out of the blue, and I had heard, it is, and I had heard of the Camino, but I'd completely forgotten about it. It was something that somebody had told me about probably 10 years before, and I'd always liked the idea of walking across Spain because Spain always appealed to me. It wasn't too far away, and I liked Spanish food, and so that kind of, and I listened to it, he had also walked the Camino, and some interesting. It basically the end result of him walking the Camino a few months before meeting me was him having the courage to move to London, not commit to a career in the restaurant trade in Poland, where he's Polish, and also to commit to his dreams of being a filmmaker. That was his passion. He was a photographer and a filmmaker, and funny enough, a few days before, on that same week I met him and his producer friend had raised funding for an independent film, a million pound funding. Yeah, so it was a pretty amazing story that it all started with him walking the Camino, leaving his fiancée, leaving his former catering or restaurant trade behind, and coming to London. So it was an amazing story. It kind of stayed with me for a few days. But I guess again, like everything, you're back into your life, and I was still thinking about, should I go back to the financial world again, working things out. And then maybe a week or two later, I went to a bookshop with a friend of mine, and he was looking for the book, The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Mm-hmm. And so he, sort of, I don't know if that was a sign just in the name of that book. He went hiking around the Waterstones bookshop we were in to look for that book, and I, as I normally do in a bookshop, found myself browsing in the travel section of the bookstore, and one book in particular got my attention, or the spine of it. It seemed to be sort of just poking its way out at me, or this is how I remember it now, in a sort of a romantic way, was a book by Paulo Coelho called The Pilgrimage.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if you know that one, but that is actually his first book.
Yeah.
So a lot of people are aware of his very famous book, The Alchemist. But The Pilgrimage is his first book, which actually he wrote after walking the Camino de Santiago himself, and that experience gave him the courage to commit to being a writer. Yeah, and the rest is kind of history now.
I know. I love that. I read that book in 1996.
Did you really? Wow.
That was the first time I'd ever heard of the Camino, and I decided I had to do it, and I've had that in my mind ever since, and I've still not walked the Camino. But ever since I read that book was the first thing that planted the seed of the Camino in my brain. 1996.
Yeah, it's very inspirational, as are all his books. Which I've read maybe 3 or 4 of his books, as I say, in The Alchemist, and they do have that sort of quest or seeking something or trying to understand something in your life, and often they do involve going on a journey. So I was surprised to find, because I assumed The Alchemist was his first book, and so then I think I must have bought that book. I bought the book, read it, and I just kind of think it was like a sign of the Polish guy Paulo Coelho, and I think something. There was a third thing. I think actually I went back to that bookshop, maybe looking for some more travel books, and then I saw Paulo Coelho's again. The Alchemist, I think, was on top of a pile of books they were promoting, and I just kind of thought, you know what, I'm still crashing at my friend's place. My flat is rented. I didn't have a job to return to. I was unsettled still, and so within a few weeks, I found myself at the start of the Camino de Santiago, which we take the traditional route is the Camino Francis, which I'm sure you're aware of, and have probably done some research now.
Much research. I've read so many books.
And so it's. That's a little French village, Basque village on the French side of the Pyrenees, which you start at. So I found myself there, ready, about to walk the Camino. So that's what took me there, I guess. Signs, which I think it's only in hindsight that I started to sort of, how do you say, put the dots together and maybe think that maybe there was something pointing me in that direction. Maybe because of my previous travels, I was a little bit more aware of just, going with my intuition a bit. Yeah. And if I, if various ideas pop into my head through whatever means, just being open to them. Yeah. And the thing I'd say about the Camino is you have to give yourself time. Yeah. And, you don't want to rush the experience for physical reasons, because you don't want to have an injury. And also to just be open to the experience. And I had plenty of time. So, so that's how I ended up there.
Wow. So what was the experience like for you? Because this is the longest trail you had done at that point.
That's right. Yeah. So it's 31, depending on how fast you walk, but anything between 4 to 5 weeks for the average walker. And it took me, I believe, 31 days. Gosh, how do I summarize an experience like the Camino? As I say, much longer than the other ones. The other ones are pretty physically challenging because they were high up in the Andes and mountainous. You do cross a few mountain ranges on the Camino, and the very first day is a tough challenge if you're not fit. Crossing the Pyrenees into Spain, and that is tough on some people, and it's a real test to sort of your I think courage and commitment to walking the Camino. But the next day's downhill after that. And, you get fit as you walk. You get fit for purpose. And it sounds a bit of a cliche, but mind, body, soul, and physically on that. But I mean, how would I sort of say how was it? It's it's a community in so many different ways, is how I put it. This walk, it's a community, and I can expand on that if you like.
Yeah, sure. Because it's like a whole kind of subculture, it's like a different world.
Yeah, I mean, you don't know what to expect.
Yeah.
You don't know what to expect, and you're a little bit nervous and anxious for numbers of reasons, especially if you walk it on your own, like I did. And the majority of people do walk it on their own. And I think so. People are just anxious about who will I meet, the uncertainty. Can I walk, 800 kilometers across a country? And but I think so. There's a community in different ways. There's a community of the solo walkers who, before long, come together and group together and make friends and walk with each other. And before you know it, you've made a best friend within a few days. And I was lucky. I met a group of Italians, a Brazilian, and a French girl, and we all bonded easily. And it's the camaraderie of that community, because you're all doing the same thing. You're all walking to Santiago, which is at the end of the trail. You've all got your doubts. You're all going to pick up an injury at some point, whether it's blisters or not. And so you're there sort of helping each other in that sense.
Yeah.
You all walk at a different pace. So sometimes you'll walk together. Sometimes you'll walk on your own. And other times there'll be someone who, is keen to get to the village. You've perhaps decided you're going to stay out that night, and we'll go ahead and reserve a bed for you in the hostels. The albergues, as they're called. So there's that camaraderie community with the people that you walk with, and there's other people, of course, whose paths you cross as they walk, and you all understand what about a little bit about the history and kind of the idea of walking. And then there's so there is that camaraderie, as I say, of things, and I think it becomes quite intimate as well as a community, because there's nothing else to do really apart from walk and talk, sleep and eat, and of course observe nature and everything around you. And so as you walk, you often, there's the well-worn phrase people ask, what's your reason for walking the Camino? And everybody should have a reason, I think, and generally does have a reason. And so you start to become quite intimate about your past life while you're walking it, maybe problems you've had. And, a lot of the people I was with, and at least I met, generally had something they wanted to overcome in their past life. And then the other community is the villages and the towns and the cities you pass through. And again, when the villages which the Camino passes through, are very open and receptive to the pilgrims, as you're called, as you walk, because they know the history of it and know that it's a pilgrimage that at its height, for example, had 1 million pilgrims walking it a year, Christian pilgrims. So they're very connected to the history of the Camino and what it means, and so the villages you pass through, it's an economy in that sense as well, because there's municipal and private hostels you can stay at. There's restaurants, and people sort of create a sort of economic opportunities along there, whether it's a fruit stall or a shop or something. So everybody understands. And you're part of so. The locals and yourselves are part of that community. And then I think, for some people, there's a sort of community in terms of faith. So, it has its roots in, Catholicism and a Christian walk. And, maybe, I don't know, a third of the people that walk it now still walk it for religious reasons. So you have there are regular pilgrim masses set up, the pilgrims in the local churches and things each day that you can attend. So there's a community in terms of faith, and I would say for me, I'm not religious, but there's a spiritual sort of connection between everyone, and I think that is very much a community in that sense, because you all know there's something special about it. You don't know why, but there is a sort of as I say, that connection in terms of the spiritual feeling that you all have.
So one of the things that I really like about going on a long distance trail in this country, in the UK, is that I'm often alone for hours at a time, and I love that. And the Camino seems much more social. So on this more social trail, were you able to reconnect with yourself and to kind of go within and have like inner reflection and transformation during that walk?
Yes, yeah, absolutely. I mean, yes, it is very social, and I've described some of the walking part of that, but it is also social, as we alluded to, in the hostels. Eating together, and you often drink together.
Yeah.
One of the benefits of having the pilgrim meal, which all pilgrims sort of can do, is that there's always about half a bottle of wine for each pilgrim. So that's it. So it's very social, yes. But no, I mean, one of the things about walking the Camino is that you can choose to walk it however you like. So even though I started on my own, and in the first few days made friends with a group, and they were always there, I decided to sometimes walk on my own for a couple of days, or intermittently throughout the day walk on my own, just arrange to meet later in the day or at a cafe or something, which we could see on the map was when I was in another village or something. And everybody's very respectful of that. Because everybody knows that you might need your space.
Yeah.
You might have something you're working through in your mind, and you need that distance. So no, absolutely. If you want to, for me, it was perfect because I could be social when I wanted, and I could sort of be a bit introvert and find my own space. And there were, when I was trying to come to terms with really, what do I do next? That was my answer. And I did have a sort of spiritual epiphany, although I wasn't really aware of it at the time. But by the end, things just seemed to sort of, let's just say the journey continued as the effect of the Camino had sort of worked its way through me.
And I think that's something a lot of people don't take into consideration. It's like the walk isn't just the walk, the X amount of days that you're on the trail. There's an integration time afterwards where your whole system is kind of taking on whatever transformation it is that you've experienced.
Well, I think, there's a number of things. There's a sort of internal, as you suggest, spiritual transformation, perhaps, which I think started to happen maybe a week or so after I sort of committed to the Camino in terms of my mindset, and then there's that sort of, when it comes to an end, there's that sort of coming to terms with it. Well, I've just had this sort of experience for a month or so, which is just a very simple experience of walking, breathing, eating, and being amongst nature for most of the time. So there's that sort of hard thing about when you sort of step off the trail. How do I adjust? And I think there's that thing when you come back to the real world, it's like sort of, you've got some learnings, but how do you communicate that to others who might not have walked the Camino? How do you sort of then, in this sort of, you have some romantic notions of what you really want in your life, how do you make them happen when everybody's got sort of financial commitments, etc.? So there are sort of those coming, trying to understand and sort of work out those things. What was the exact question? Sorry, just so I can summarize.
I don't know what the exact question was, but it was like, I think a lot of people consider the experience to just be the time that you're on the trail, but sometimes when you come back, it takes time to integrate whatever it is that you've experienced or learned and understand the experience also.
Yeah, so I think so, yes. And as I say, there were a number of different, I think, at least for me, a number of different things in terms of stepping off the trail, as I say. Some of the ideas which started to sort of blossom inside me. How do I bring them into my life? But also, I think I guess the one thing which, as I said, there were those sort of things, how do you sort of come to terms with it all? I think you have to have faith and just have faith in the journey and have faith that the work that's kind of maybe subconsciously happened on that walk will come through, and not force it. Yeah. And I guess you could say I maybe tried to force it a little bit, in a sense that I didn't have all the answers. What work would I do at the end of it? I didn't have that sort of light bulb moment. But what I did do is I just, for the first time, set up a blog and just wanted to share my sort of some of my journals and a blog piece about what the Camino is, the people I met, some of the experiences. And you could say that was just trying to force it out in the world or get some meaning from it.
And also process your experience, because sometimes when it's in your head, it's like you don't necessarily, it's not organized, but then when you put it into written words, it kind of helps you understand what it was that you went through.
I think so, yes, and I think it gave definitely more clarity there. And I think I wanted to sort of tell the world and shout about it and share it. And yes, by writing it down, you sort of decipher some of that noise in your head.
And so, at what point did that blog turn into a book? Because you've eventually written some books.
That's true. Yeah. So that was the precursor to me writing books. And again, I didn't set out to write books inspired by the experience. But I set up this blog, and I've just, I wrote a sort of a blog piece about, of my sort of condensed micro memoir of walking the Camino. But I had this blog now. And then somehow, I don't know exactly how it started, but I started to write a fictional blog story, and that was a sort of, it kind of morphed from that original blog piece into a character who was a flamenco guitarist, a young flamenco guitarist who had raw talent, but didn't really believe in his talent or didn't see where he could take it. And that was definitely inspired by seeing people busk on the Camino or busking in towns and cities you pass through. So that original website then became like a serial blog where I just for fun, just maybe write one chapter or a sort of a sequence. Then a week later, write another sequence as to where this character was going. And I put it on something called Wattpad. Are you aware of Wattpad?
I had never heard of it until I heard you mention it in another podcast episode. But yeah, tell us what that is.
Yeah, so I think it's still going, but basically Wattpad is a blog site, a popular blog site where you can share fictional stories for free. And 50 Shades of Grey actually started on there. So my books are pretty tame, to be honest. They're not raunchy or anything sexy or anything like that in that sense. But the point is, people do go to Wattpad, and obviously, clearly, in the case of 50 Shades of Grey, where it got a lot of fanfare there, it had to be taken off and then and published because it was so popular. I started putting my blog serial pieces on there when I discovered it, and each time I put another chapter on there, I seemed to get more followers and readers, and sort of starting off with say 50 or 60 the first day.
Wow, that's
first
good.
piece, yeah. But I think maybe I was lucky at the time. It was pretty popular, but I'm sure it's still popular now. But then the next time I put the second chapter up, maybe 200 people had read it, and people were starting to engage a little bit and leave comments and ask, when's the next piece coming? But by the time I kind of got to, I think, went to the penultimate chapter on there, I was up to maybe 1,000 reads or something like that. And I was like, gosh, maybe I've got something. And so I didn't publish the final chapter, and I took down the story from Wattpad, and then discovered Amazon, self-publishing, independent publishing, and just put it on there. Did it professionally. Got a professional editor, copy edited, proofread. And started to realize there was another way of getting your words out there. And yeah, on Amazon, I started to get nice reviews, and people were buying the book, and that's how it kind of started. So as I say, I didn't set out to write a book following the Camino. It was really about, the Camino was like, okay, follow the signs. And the end result really in many ways was kind of a creative journey, and sort of finding my writer's voice. And I mean, I've always loved books, but I'd never written a book before. I guess the closest I got to actually just writing was sort of financial pieces that I had to write in my former day job at a stockbroker financial services company.
That's a bit different from a novel.
Yeah. So that, I think I was able to express my journey in a fictional sense, and so that's how I ended up writing the books.
Excellent. So you kind of got a whole new career out of the Camino.
Well, yes, it hasn't. I mean, I'm not, how to put it, I'm not a best-selling author yet.
Not yet.
But it's very nice when you see this extra bit of pocket money come into your account each month, and I've been number one in a few categories on Amazon and things. Excellent. So there must be something in it. But most of all, I think I just enjoy the process.
Yeah.
And after that first book, I didn't expect to write I didn't expect it to turn into a series, and it's going to be a trilogy now, and I'm working on the third book. But I got such nice reviews from the first book, and maybe the first sort of, third or so of the reviews, or earlier reviews I got with the book started to suggest, well, what happens next to the character? And I kind of thought, well, I've written my book. In my mind, I know I've left the character. It's pretty clear he's going to complete the Camino de Santiago. But like for me and like for my character, that was really just the start of his Camino or the start of his journey. And so I wrote a second book, which I've been very pleased with, and had some great feedback and great numbers on the Amazon bookstore and etc. And now I'm on the third book. So yes, it's
excellent.
And I think all of those words for me, maybe they're inside me, but the catalyst to get in touch with those words definitely came from my experiences along the Camino, and I think it was the sort of the nature stepping out of my everyday environment that kind of awakened a spiritual and creative side to me that I guess I always wanted, but just never utilized.
Yeah. So you've actually gone on to walk a couple of different trails in preparation for your second and third books. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah, absolutely right. So everybody knows the Camino Frances, which is the traditional Camino across northern Spain. I think as you cross 4 regions of Spain, ending up at Santiago de Compostela. But kind of the Camino is a kind of like a tributary of different trails, all ending up at Santiago, because it was a European pilgrimage, mainly from North Europe to Santiago. And so there's lots of different ways to get there, and most of them then at one point or other arrive on the main Camino, the Camino Frances. But there are other trails that crisscross across Spain. And so for the second book, my character, who's now on his flamenco journey, arrives in Madrid. And I hadn't realized that from the south of Spain in Andalusia, there are trails which will take you up to Madrid or take you onto what's known as the Via de la Plata, which goes through sort of the spine of Spain. And there are caminos from the Mediterranean called the Camino Mazarabi, which take you onto that, as I say, that spine trail, Via Plata. And so I was sort of researching Madrid, where my character would go, but I knew he had to get back on the road at some point, and Madrid was not his answer. And then I discovered when I was there that there were other caminos up, which I wasn't aware of because they're less well walked, from the Mediterranean. But of course, historically, there would have been pilgrims who would have, medieval times especially, who would have made their way up from the coastline of Spain. And so I discovered what's known as the Mazarabe, and I walked that a couple of years ago for research for the second book. My character actually walks it in reverse to the coast. I walked it the traditional way from the coast, because I didn't want to get lost. And it's not particularly well worn. Only about I think no more than 100 people a year walk it at the moment. So it's very rural, and it's kind of south of Granada, a very rural part with a village of a lot of elderly people, typically quiet, distant, hilly, remote at times. And that was fantastic. If you want to be totally on your own, I only ever saw two pilgrims on bicycles who waved at me from a distance. This is the one if you want to be, if you want complete isolation. Your only company will be the villagers or the odd person that crosses your path. And again, the villagers are very open, and it's a different experience. There's not so many municipal hostels. I stayed in a couple of mayor's houses actually, who open up the houses or a spare house or a school and things to you to stay. So that is an alternative one. And there are, as I say, there are a number of different ones. There's the Portuguese, which is I believe which I know you know about.
Yeah.
And I know you'll be when we get through all of this lockdown. And so the Portuguese, I think, is the second. I don't know. You'll know better than me. It's the second most popular, isn't it?
It is. Yeah. But it's still way behind the Frances. But yes, it is the second most popular Camino.
Yeah. So I walked the first half of that last summer, and this is preparation for for the third book. And the working title is called Diego's Guitar, and this is. There's been about a 7-year gap now. No, so 8-year gap between Diego's last story of completing his Mozarabe Camino, and he's now kind of living what he thinks his dreams are and what he wants, but his life's moved on. So anyway, I went to Portugal, Porto. So it does start in Lisbon actually. So I started at Porto and walked for about 6 days and up to Tui, which is on the border, which is just inside Spain. It's the point you arrive at Spain on that Camino. Then there's about another 5 days left, which will take you up to Santiago. So you walk north through Portugal and Spain on that one. And so there's, as I say, so I've got sort of, I don't know, what do you call it, Camino-itis, I guess now.
Yeah.
But it's but I love the fact that the books have given me an excuse to return to the Camino. It's just and the experience just gets richer and richer as I sort of see it from different countries' perspective, different landscape, and of course for me it's always about the people that intersect your journey on the Camino.
Yeah. So I'm conscious of time, but I really want to ask you, in summary, what do you get out of walking long distance trails, and why would you recommend someone else give it a try?
Wow.
That's huge. I'm sorry.
Yeah. No, it's good. I know it's a great question, but I mean, as you know, somebody who writes about this, you'd think I'd have a succinct answer for it. So I'm sort of slightly dreading a question like that. But what do I get out of it, the Camino? So what do I get out of the Camino? I think for me, it's the peace that it gives. It's just stepping outside of the routine of life, where where really you don't see the wood for the trees often, where we're just running around so much. We never take the time to stop.
Yeah,
I think the Camino forces you to slow down, be open to new cultures, to Spain. On that particular one, I think long distance, you have to slow down, else you'll have an injury to give yourself time. And and I think it has changed me in a sense now that even when we're on this lockdown at the period, but obviously in the UK, we are allowed out for our daily exercise, which can involve walking.
Yeah.
Living in southwest London, I do have a few parks here, luckily, including Wimbledon Common.
Excellent.
So when I get out, it's for a walk. It's not a long walk, obviously, in the sense of what we're talking about. But I mean, at the moment, or last week, only lasts for a couple of weeks. But there's the cherry blossom in the most nearest park here, and it's just stopping to appreciate these fleeting moments in life, which you can miss if you don't stop. Yeah. And I think like on a long distance walk, if you don't stop and appreciate something, you'll have passed it. So that I think for me that is it. It's a heightened awareness which you get of your surrounding environment, which sometimes we just lose sight of when we just don't take the time to stop. So even though it's walking, I know it sounds a bit sort of strange. For me, it's stopping.
Yeah. Yeah.
What's the second part? Sorry.
And why would you recommend someone else embark upon a long distance trail?
Because I think in whatever way it will get you outside of your comfort zone.
Yeah.
And I think it's very easy to be comfortable and not challenge yourselves.
Yeah.
So if it's just, it could physically challenge you if you just think that how could I walk across a country as you do on the Camino de Santiago? You can do. Most people can. As I say, the average person with average fitness can, but you just have to learn to break things down into bite-sized chunks. So it may be a month walking across a country of 800 kilometers if you choose that as a long village, town, city, mountain range region. You break it down like that. And so I think, we just have to learn how to change our mindset with something, even if it's a physical challenge. And I think it's a mindset. It will get you outside of your comfort zone if you're used to sort of, I don't know, staying in hotels, staying in a hostel of other people. It's sort of getting outside of your comfort zone of say, literally comfort. And I think it also makes you just appreciate your home comforts and maybe help you look at them in a different way. So I'd say yes, it's a fantastic way to challenge yourself in different ways and get outside of your comfort zone.
Excellent. So this is going to go live on Monday, May 4th.
Okay.
And it's going to coincide with our promo of walking books. We've teamed up with a few other authors who've written books on walking and getting outdoors. And we'll all be offering a discount on our books. And this is also going to coincide with the launch of my second edition of my South Downs Way book. So is there anything you'd like to add to that? I'm super excited about this. This was kind of your idea.
Yes, yes it was, but I hadn't realised it was going to tie in with the podcast. So that's an added bonus. So yes, it's very exciting. Very exciting. So I'd like to add to that. Well, just that there'll be a few other walkers long distance walkers who are going to be involved with that promo, and we're all reducing the price of our books that we're offering to sort of around 99p or 99 cents, around that level. It might be different depending on the book and the author. I think I'm excited to share my first book in this series, which I've called the Reluctant Pilgrim series. So Candy Floss Guitar is the first book, and that will be available for 99p on the same day that this podcast comes out. So yes.
Yay. Excellent.
I'm excited to grab your book as well.
Oh yes, and I've really enjoyed your book, and I'm looking forward to reading the second one to see what exactly happens with the Reluctant Pilgrim. Thank you so much for joining me. I really, really enjoyed this conversation, and I could keep talking about walking for hours, but probably no one wants to listen to a 3-hour podcast episode.
Well, no, certainly not to me anyway. You've got a much nicer, how to put it, narrator's voice. But yes, it would be nice to talk about these things. But hopefully, yes, your listeners have got something out of this podcast.
Oh, I'm sure they will. I love walking so much, so I'm happy to talk about it with another walking aficionado.
It makes me want to get out now. So at least the great thing is we can social distance by walking. So that is something that we can say here.
And we could take advantage of this lock-in time to read books about future long-distance trails that we might want to walk.
Oh,
and get inspired.
Yes, that sounds like a good idea. I wonder if we can think of something to help on that basis.
Yeah. So I will be linking to that promo in the show notes, and we'll both be spreading the word about that once that goes live. So again, thank you for joining me, and thank you for talking about walking.
It's been great, Holly. Thanks again.
Thanks. So this is a little addition to the outro that I recorded yesterday after I did the interview, because I realized it's been a year and a half since the last time I did an interview. I mean, this wasn't really an interview. It's more like a co-hosted conversation about long-distance walking. But the point is, it's been a long time since I had a new person on the show. So that means that I forgot to invite Stephen to share where you can find him online. So his website is stephenrmarriott.com, and that's Stephen with a PH, letter R, Marriott with 2 R's and 2 T's.com, stephenrmarriott.com. You can also find him on Instagram at stephenrmarriott. And he has a great Instagram profile. I love seeing the pictures of his travels there, of his walking. I love seeing where other people travel, so I highly recommend that you follow him there. You can find his 2 books on Amazon. Candy Floss Guitar is the first one, and Santiago's Guitar is the second one. Those are the 2 books in the Reluctant Pilgrim series. As I said, I've read the first one, and I really enjoyed it, and I'm very much looking forward to reading the second one. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode. No, we're still under lockdown as I record this, but I think it's really important for us to start thinking ahead and dreaming of things that we might want to do once lockdown is lifted and we can enter a new phase of our lives. So I hope you found this interesting and useful, and I hope you check out our book promo, which will be coming up in a couple days. I will be sharing a link to that in the show notes of this episode, and I will also be sharing it on social media and to my email list. So again, please drop me a line. Let me know what you thought about this week's episode. You can email me at holly@hollywharton.com or find me online and get in touch. I'm always welcoming of your feedback, and I would love to hear of any other topics you might want me to discuss. Thank you so much for listening. And remember to visit hollywharton.com/354 for the show notes on this episode. Thank you. Thanks so much for listening to Into the Woods with Holly Wharton. You can find more information about today's episode, including links for topics that were discussed, at hollywharton.com. That's HOLLYWORTON.com. If you'd like to connect with other listeners and get support on your journey, I would love for you to join my private community on Patreon. That's patreon.com/Holly Wharton. That's patreon.com/Holly Wharton. Thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to seeing you next week.